On January 15, 1919, the day started ordinary in the North End neighborhood of Boston. The weather was unseasonably mild for the middle of January, about 40 degrees, with the streets bare of snow. School children were walking home for their lunch breaks, their footsteps accompanied by the sound of hooves against the stone pavement of Commercial Street. Laborers nearby worked through the loud shutters of a passing train running along the uplifted track. Towering over the elevated track stood an enormous 50-foot-tall tank filled to the brim with molasses, which creaked throughout various times of the day. It wasn't unusual for the tank to emit low groans and creaks, sounds the local residents had learned to ignore. But by early afternoon, these rumbles grew louder and more insistent. And at about 12:30, with the sound described as a sort of muffled roar, the giant molasses tank came apart. It seemed to rise and then split. Quote, the rivets popping in a way that reminded many ex-soldiers of machine gun fire, and then a wet brown hell broke loose, flooding downtown Boston. In what was seen as a freak incident at the time of the news report, further investigation points towards the negligence of United States Industrial Alcohol, the company responsible for constructing the tank. Hello everyone, today we are going to be talking about the strange disaster called the Great Molasses Flood that resulted in the deaths of 21 people and left the north end of Boston with the lingering scent of molasses for over 60 years. Before we talk about the disaster that was the rupture of the tank and the messy legal trial that followed, we need to address the fatal mistakes that led up to this tragedy. The tank had been only built 4 years prior to the incident in 1915 by Purity Distilling Company. It was to provide storage for large shipments of molasses before it was delivered to distilleries by train cars. Not only did it provide Boston with its supply of molasses, but the substance was processed to produce nitroglycerin and explosives during World War I. According to locals, they had knowledge of a tank experiencing leakages. Author Stephen Palaio reports that North End children collected pails of the sticky, sweet molasses. Upon hearing complaints, Purity Distilling Company irresponsibly painted the structure a dark brown to disguise the molasses oozing out instead of repairing the cracks. Upon investigation, it was revealed by structural engineers that the walls of the tank were, quote, too thin, and that the chemical makeup contributed to the weakness of the material. Additionally, the unusually warm weather and the brand new shipment of molasses is what caused the collapse of the walls. A combination of these factors proved to be a recipe for disaster. When the wall burst, it sent 2.3 million gallons of molasses to spew into the town at 35 miles per hour. Since the tank was built right next to the Boston Elevated Railroad, it sent syrup, quote, knocking over a train on the tracks, crushing buildings, and moving a firehouse and other buildings off their foundation, end quote. Along with the devastation to the town buildings, the flood created a death toll. Molasses flung debris toward civilians, killing them instantly. Among the dead were children collecting firewood nearby, 10-year-olds Maria DiStasio and Pascale Iantosca, one suffocated and the other crushed by a rail car. Anthony DiStasio, Maria's brother, miraculously survived. Edward Parks describes in Smithsonian, quote, he was picked up by the wave and carried, tumbling on its crest, almost as though he was surfing. He couldn't answer his mother's call. His throat was so clogged with the smothering goo, end quote. After the wave receded, it left parts of the north end obliterated. The flood reached a whopping depth of 15 feet and in places was 100 yards wide over a 2-block area, which is roughly the size of the Statue of Liberty. The spill was so widespread that it reached stable animals, smothering horses. Between the pile of debris, a Boston Post reporter wrote, here and there a struggle to form. Whether it was animal or human being was impossible to tell. Only an upheaval, a thrashing about in a sticky mass, showed where any life was. Rescue efforts were heroic but grueling. Police officers, firefighters, and over 100 sailors from the USS Nantucket battled through the quicksand-like sludge to retrieve survivors. The most intense recovery was located at the Engine 31 firehouse. Several men were trapped in the molasses-flooded pocket of space on the collapsed first floor. Workers freed the survivors after several hours of cutting away floorboards and debris, but not before one of the firefighters tragically lost his strength and drowned. In the days that followed, workers continued pulling bodies from the ruins. Horses were euthanized after becoming stuck, and some victims remained missing for months. One man, wagon driver Cesare Nicolo, wasn't recovered from Boston Harbor until nearly 4 months later. In Park's article, he illustrates the devastation of the flood. Quote, "The great brown wave caught and killed most of the nearby laborers. The fireboat company quarters was splintered. A lorry was blasted right through a wooden fence, and a wagon driver was found later, dead and frozen in his last attitude like a figure from the ashes of Pompeii." End quote. Cleanup was tedious, with firefighters pumping salt water through hoses to dissolve the molasses, then layering the streets with sand to absorb the stickiness and moisture left behind. Everything a Bostonian touched was sticky. While this tragedy was sudden and accidental, the legal trial that followed proved it was avoidable. The USIA was deemed guilty after a lengthy 5-year trial, with over 119 lawsuits filed in the wake of the flood. Plaintiffs proposed that the rupture of the tank was due to the negligence of the company during and after its construction. This includes the USIA's refusal to address the leakages reported by locals. Over time, it would make sense that the leakage along with the chemical degradation of the tank's material would lead to a failure. However, USIA denied any wrongdoing. Amidst a national wave of bombings across the country, the company claimed the tank had been deliberately rigged by explosives by an Italian anarchist group. During this time period in Boston, the southern Italian population of the city were blamed for much of the crime rate. They cited an anonymous threat from a year prior but produced no further evidence. Investigators found no physical signs of sabotage, only a poorly constructed tank, hastily built and overloaded with product. The court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, awarding $628,000 in damages, which is around $8 million today. Following this incident, 2 new laws were produced. First, it is inhibited to put an accountant in charge of a building project. And second, industrial structures cannot be built in residential neighborhoods. Today, the Great Molasses Flood is a reminder towards the importance of safety when it comes to structural engineering. The north end of Boston is historically known for its close-knit community of neighbors, most coming from Italian backgrounds. The area was considered a slum characterized by tenement housing, crowded with residents who lived through poor labor and living conditions that were prominent during the immigration wave of the early 1900s. However, despite living in poverty, North Enders from this time emphasized their positive relationship with family, friends, and neighbors. President of the North End Historical Society, Tom Demigella, says that if you were to talk to a North Ender who lived there 50 to 100 years ago, they would tell you, "We didn't have much, but you know what? We had good times with each other." This attitude is what kept the North End thriving, making it one of the most historically rich neighborhoods of Boston and harboring a little Italy. Hopefully you enjoyed the video as much as I did talking about it. I wanted to make a video on a topic that I found interesting because I haven't heard of the Great Molasses Flood before. This is my first video on here, and there will be more uploads coming soon. So thank you guys for watching, and hopefully you learned something about the Great Molasses Flood. So I'll see you in the next video. Bye!